Thank you so much for being here with me today. It means a lot to me. I know how much you value your time. And so sitting here with you today is a big opportunity for me to be able to question a mind as great as yours. And so my first question is, were you always like this? Or was this something that your parents instilled in you, like wanting to be great? Did you wake up and say, I want to be great? Or were your parents always telling you, you better
Hmm.
be great? It's like, how did Dame Amelia come to be?
So it's an interesting question. First, thank you for asking me to do this. I hope I can add a little something to your efforts. I think you're right to focus on my parents because they were very important. And I think often your family is very important. And I grew up in a family where what was instilled in me was that I could do anything I put my mind to. Not that I had to be the best, not that I had to be the greatest, not that I had to be an A student, although they were certainly interested in those things. I had no tiger moms. I didn't have a tiger mom, but there were two important things. One, you did the best you could with what you had because you were given a lot. And one of the most important things in life is to make a contribution. So that and those two things, as well as looking out for the little guy, which was a very big thing for my parents, that is what inspired me to do the things that I've done. I didn't want to be the greatest lawyer. I started out as a lawyer. I didn't want to be the greatest banker. I wanted to make a contribution. I wanted to make a difference. And there's a wonderful quote from, well, some people say it's John Kennedy, some people say it's Robert Kennedy, and forgive the gender, but the appropriate quote is every man can make a difference and every man must try.
Hmm.
And that's what has driven me to do all the different things that I've done and the way that I've done them. So the last point I would make, and if that's the case, if you've been given a lot, which I was, in terms of where I grew up, and you have been instilled in you that you should do the best you can with what you have and make a contribution, and you marry that with, and you can do anything you put your mind to, whether it's
Hmm.
fixing a fishing reel or sorting out a merger or an acquisition. If that's your mindset, then that's what drives you to do what you do. And hopefully, in some instances, you will definitely excel, and some you'll just do an okay job, but you'll do your job. And then the last thing I would say is a big thing from my parents was don't just do something, go the extra mile. Whether it's helping your friends, building a business, don't just do what you have to do, really throw your heart into it and go the extra mile. So all that, believe it or not, came from my family. So they weren't demanding. They
Wow.
had strong standards, but they weren't demanding at all. Um, and I did well in school, but I never felt that I was being judged. They helped from time to time, but no, it was the values and the way you live your life that they instilled in me that are a fundamental part of who I am and how I went ahead and led my life and did what I did in business.
Seemed like they passed down a lot of wisdom to you.
Yeah. And sometimes in words and sometimes in deeds. So don't do what I say, do as I do.
My
So
next question is, do you believe in being satisfied? Because I feel like you went into law. It's kind of like, wow, that's a big career,
yeah.
like most people would have been satisfied with that. And then you transitioned into banking.
Hmm.
Like,
I went to the
why?
dark
Like,
side.
what was the mindset there?
Went to the dark side. But no, go back to being little. As a little girl, I wanted to be a lawyer. Most of my father's relatives were lawyers, his friends were lawyers. I argued a lot as a kid. I was a very bad arguer. I was arguing with my parents, particularly my mother. But I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I went to Wellesley for 4 years. Then I worked in New York for 2 years as a paralegal. I could have been an analyst at Goldman Sachs or an associate paralegal at Sullivan and Cromwell. And I really liked the people at Sullivan and Cromwell. I wanted to be a lawyer. So that's what I did. But I needed to earn money to go to law school. So I did. I then went to the University of Virginia because I was interested in international law, and they were very big in that. It was a top 10 school. And I did that for 3 years. And I got my degree. I passed the New York bar, which is not an insignificant feat. It's
Wow.
terrifying. And then I went to work at Sullivan and Cromwell as a lawyer, and I loved what I did. And then in 2000, that was in 2000, October 1983. And then in summer 1985, so less than 2 years later, one of the senior managing partners came and said that they wanted me to go to Paris. So I'd always wanted to go to London. I was very disappointed to go in Paris. And the managing partner said, well, you speak French, and it'd be a surprise to you, probably. Most people here speak English. They don't speak French. So you're going to Paris. So at the end of 85, early 86, I ended up in Paris as a lawyer. Now, in those days, in most law firms, you could only spend 18 months to 2 years outside the headquarters, so outside of New York. And then you had to go back if you wanted to be a partner. And partnership track was 7 or 8 years. I was only a 2.5-year lawyer, 3-year lawyer. And at the time, because London was exploding with privatizations, they needed help. So I was sort of running back and forth between Paris and London doing deals, if you will. They're banking deals, securities deals, some mergers and acquisitions. And Morgan Stanley saw me, and I'd known some of the people there. And I was approached about whether I wanted to go in as a banker or as a lawyer. And I had never thought about leaving Sullivan and Cromwell. I'd assumed I'd go and either make a good run for partner and then go somewhere else and make partner or whatever. But it was 1986, the end of 86, early 87. And Europe was exploding. There was, the French markets were exploding. It was pre-Euro, it was pre-1992. It was about to merge. The securities markets and the European markets in the UK were just going gangbusters, and it was fun. Everything was new. It was being imported from the United States. And I thought, do I want to go back to New York and mark up my 153rd indenture, which is a 200-something page document, or do I want to stay and ride this rodeo? And so I didn't go straight into banking. I decided to ride that rodeo and move from Paris to London to Morgan Stanley to help set up a legal and a compliance department. And I did that for about 2 or 3 years. And then I left the law and went into the banking side. So it wasn't that I wasn't satisfied or was satisfied. It was all about opportunity. And I didn't want to leave Europe. It was where it was happening.
Of course.
So I stayed.
Wow, you seized an opportunity.
Yeah. And by the way, I left the United States at the end of 85, and I never returned.
Wow.
So of course, I've gone back thousands of times for business. I don't mean that. I've never worked full time in a US office since December 85.
Okay. Both of those industries, first law, then banking. What would you say you learned about yourself during both?
Well, number one, I learned the importance of what I'd learned as a child. You did well when you worked hard, when you had somebody else's back, when you're willing to go the extra mile, when you're willing to take risks, go after things, you're willing to make a contribution, be a team player. Those mattered a lot. I'm often asked, what would I tell my 20-year-old self? And I would tell my 20-year-old self now, it's okay to be different. And actually, it can be a distinctive advantage. And in the 80s and 90s, for women in particular, and even more so for people of color, but, in the 80s and 90s, to be a woman in an investment bank was a bit challenging, shall we say. And you're constantly forced to be like everybody else, and I worked with people who were, they were out testosteroning the men on the trading floor. They wore pantsuits, big, charcoal gray. They swore like a trooper. And it's like, I can't do that. That isn't me. But there is this push, this pressure to assimilate and be like everybody else. And actually, it's the people who are different, who bring a different perspective, who make a real contribution to an organization. The people who make people sit up and say, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Well, that's an interesting perspective." They go against the herd. They're still a part of the team, but they bring a different perspective. So that is probably one of the most important things I've learned. It is okay. It's actually an asset to be different. And
Wow.
society, I think, often tries to shoehorn people at a too young age into conforming. Oh, I'm not sure that's appropriate sometimes. So as you get older, one, it's okay to be different, and two, no matter what you think, life is not a straight line. I wanted to be a lawyer. I was going to be a lawyer, go work in a law firm, become a partner, work in Boston. Ooh. I worked in New York, didn't become a partner, went to Morgan Stanley, went on and did all sorts of other things. So you also have to be willing to take a risk, a calculated risk in some instances. But if someone presents you with an opportunity that doesn't really fit your idea of what your future looks like, don't reject it out of hand.
Hmm.
Think about it. Think about it and say, well, actually, I wasn't going to go into a bank. My mother wasn't very happy I went into a bank. She likes lawyers. I wasn't going to go into a bank, but gosh, it would mean I could stay in Europe and I could still do stuff in France and I could do deals and I don't have to mark up indentures and I could stay here as long as I wanted. Game over. So life is a straight line. Be prepared to take risks.
You kind of took one of my questions, which was going to be, what wisdom would you give to the younger generation? But then when you touched in the fact that you said what you would tell your younger self, so
Yeah, that's
you,
what I would tell the
you
younger
just took one of
generation.
mine.
Both of those, actually, I would tell the younger generation, or all of that, I would tell the younger.
Quick question about the hedge fund industry. What
Mhm.
do you think about it?
It has its place, uh, and it has an important role to play in investing in things that some people won't, and providing liquidity in some areas. There are some sharks, to be sure. There are some questionable practices. I was the chairman of the Standards Board for Alternative Investments, which was the hedge fund standards board. And it was a group of the largest hedge funds and the largest investors who came together to set standards for the hedge fund market for those who'd sign up to the standards.
Hmm.
And they were all about transparency, disclosure, acting in the interest of your clients, appropriate risk-based analysis, etc. So they were really good standards, and they also gave guidance. So quite full. And the firms that signed up to those, and they were developed in conjunction of both the user of the service, the investor, and the provider of the service, the hedge fund. And they were developed together so that both sides really wanted them, which was very important. And I think they created, in many ways, a level playing field, but also for those hedge funds. And it's hard to say, there aren't really that many hedge funds anymore. They're all alternative funds. They're in long short, they're in real estate, they're in all sorts of alternative investment funds. So we really now talk about alternative funds. Um, and I think those who adhere to strong principles and standards like the ones we developed at the Standards Board provide a huge value to the market and to investors and to innovation as well. And they're also, they are very good they're kind of the canary in the mine. They are so good at analyzing companies, trends, everything. Long before anybody else gets there, if they say, "Ooh, this company's not bad. Company's not well run. I'm not really happy about it." Okay, I mean, don't shoot the messenger. They pull out of a company, but in a fair way, appropriately. I'm not saying they're sharks, but they see a very badly underperforming company that they don't think is going to turn around and they short the stock. Well, is that their fault or the people who are managing the company's fault? So it's complicated, and it isn't, they're not good, they're not bad, it's shades of gray, but I think they do provide a service. But I think they all should adhere to the standards that we developed. Some will, some won't, but the biggest do now around the globe.
So there are a lot of people when I ask them about trading and investing, they tell me stay away from trading, it's too risky, like the short-term game is never a good one. And they always tell me, oh, definitely go down the investing route, it's safer. Like, what do you think about that?
What do you mean in
Like,
do or don't go
like
down the
big
investing route?
trading, swing trading, like they say
Oh, I
that
see.
type of short-term stuff is really
No,
dangerous. Stay away from it.
for somebody who spent my career in financial services, I don't do a lot of trading. I've never have. Partly because I was in an industry where I was already exposed to the market. Morgan Stanley is exposed to the market. I didn't expose my market to anymore. As I got more senior, I couldn't do it because of conflicts. We wouldn't allow people to do a certain amount of trading. I'm far less risk averse about most things than I used to be. I have done the world's largest bridge bungee jump with my godchildren, but I will not do day trading. I don't get the crypto side of things. I am more conservative when it comes to that. If I don't understand it, then I don't want to go there. And I don't have the time to do day trading. And I think you have to be, some people are very good at it and they're very clever, but you need to understand fundamentally how the markets work, who the actors are, what the risks are, how you're going to deal with the unexpected. Let's just take SVB that has just collapsed in 48 hours, for a variety of reasons. I mean, you have to be prepared for the unexpected. And I would say it's a level head that can do that kind of fast trading. And, it's true, what goes up will come down. So it's not something I'm a value investor for sure. I will back people and businesses I understand and that I think have a very solid future and will create long-term shareholder value that is sustainable. I will do that every day of the week, but I don't do it. I hire somebody else to do it.
Let's touch base with the Federal Reserve. Do you think what they're doing right now with interest rates, the hiking, do you think they're making all the right choices, or do you think they should be slowing down right now?
I think they've done a pretty good job. Both them, the ECB and the Bank of England, which has just raised rates again today. I think the recent turmoil in the market will cause them to pause to think about whether they will continue. I think they will. The size of the continued increase. And that is a delicate balancing act, and I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. I think to date, they've done a very good job. The economy is not where I thought it was going to be. I think, surprisingly, inflation is a worry, and we need to manage it. So it's not like we can walk away from managing it just because a couple of banks were badly managed. My concern, I think, is, I'm not a big fan necessarily of regulation. I think sensible regulation is very good. But I do wonder whether the lifting of the regulatory requirements for banks 250 billion and below in assets, i.e., they didn't need to do stress testing, whether that was sensible. And I think there are some people would say, oh, well, a stress test wouldn't have picked up what happened to SVB, which is the run and the concentration of deposits. I've gone through a lot of stress tests at State Street. I think it would have picked up a lot about how they manage their balance sheet. I think it would have picked up a lot about I think it would have probably picked up the concentration in deposits. I think they would have been questioned about it at least, and that probably would have been helpful. Now I understand. I'm against regulation for the sake of regulation and just piling on requirements that ladle on huge costs without a corresponding real benefit. But that one, I'm not sure about.
So I know you have to go soon, so
Mhm.
I have to ask you about this. The Royal Botanic Gardens.
Oh, Q, my
That
favorite.
come about.
Well, it's a good question. It isn't the obvious place you'd find a banker, to be
Yeah.
sure. Now, in fairness, my mother was a very good gardener, and Kew was her spiritual home. And I remember when I first went to London in the late 70s, early 80s, she said, "You will go to Kew when you're over there." And I said, "No, I won't." She said, "Yes, you will." I said, "No, I won't. I'm not going to go to Kew. I don't go to a bunch of gardens. You will go to Kew." I said, "Okay, fine, fine, fine. I'll go to Kew." So I went to Kew about 40 years ago, and I've been going ever since. It is an extraordinary place. But I've always thought about it as the gardens. And a friend of mine approached me, well, a couple of friends approached me and said, "Have you thought of applying to be the chair of the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew?" And I said, "No, of course not. Why would I think of that? I'm a banker. What in my background would make you think that would be appropriate? I have a lavender farm in the hills of Wales, but no, other than that, no." "Well, you'd be great at it, and you have the things that they're looking for, whatever." So, but I did some research, and the more research I did, the more I realized this wasn't just gardens. They have 350 scientists there. They have the largest collection of plants and fungi in the world. They have 40,000 different species and 2.8 million seeds in the Millennium Seed Bank. And most of the problems that we're facing in the world are going to be solved by plants and fungi. We're going to reforest things. We're going to find new crops for people to eat. We're going to find new ways to save the oceans. We're going to find we're going to bring in different kinds of trees. We're going to replenish old trees. We're going to create new coffee crops. Whatever it is going to be in plants and fungi. And the best place on the planet for it is Kew. I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. In 2019, we were running up to 2020 was going to be the big COP. And I thought, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. So anyway, then I met with the director and I did more research. So at the end of this very long process, you have to go through interview after interview. You meet with the cabinet member, so, who's the Secretary of State. He's the Secretary of State for Environment. Michael Gove, and I sat down, and he looked at my CV, and he says, "It was a very interesting CV, but not abundantly clear to me why you'd be interested in Q." And I said, "Well, Michael," he had another minister there as well. I said, "Well, Michael, it's quite simple. What my research has told me that the 260 years of history of Q, of identification, conservation, replication, and working in more than 100 countries, has all been about getting to now." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "If you think of the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, most of the solutions to both of those are going to be in plants and fungi. So why wouldn't you want to be a chair of an organization that's going to be at the heart of global efforts to solve those problems?" And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, "Oh, thank you very much. I got the job." That's why.
Wow. You just demonstrated the power of research. I feel
Yep,
like you
exactly.
probably didn't think you were gonna have the answer to that question, and you just
No, I didn't
laid it
actually,
all on them.
but I felt it powerfully. It was an easy question to answer, as you can see.
Last question of the day is, what books have you read that have shaped you to be who you are, and would you recommend it to us?
That is a hard one because I'm a big book reader, and my tastes in books. I always have. I read history at Wellesley, and no, I don't think it should right now ever become a coeducational institution. I know you're interested in that. I think there is a role for institutions that focus on women and their brain, not by their sex, but just by the virtue of the brain, and give them the confidence and the schooling to go on. And, Wellesley graduates have done very well. So right now, no, I think there's still a place. We are not an equal society in any, whether it's by gender, ethnicity, even age in some instances. So no, I don't. But I read history at at Wellesley. I always have history book on the go. But I love a thriller, and I love Lord of the Rings. I have to say, I'd have to come back to you, to be honest with you. I can't think of any one book that has so shaped me, because I read so many, that has so shaped me that I would say you have to read this book. By areas I might, but I can't think of one that is my Bible. Books are my Bible.
Have you read the Bible?
I have. I have. Cover to cover.
That's a discussion for another day.
It is a discussion, but that's but I will say, sorry, I mean, this is not about you. That's my business, not anybody else's business. I don't have a lot of time for people who try and push their religion on somebody else. So yes, I have read the Bible.
Well, Dame, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. My generation is definitely going to appreciate this wisdom.
I
And
hope so. If there's anything else, it was a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for asking me.
thank you, ma'am.
All right. Talk to you soon. See you in the Somerset Club soon.
Yes.
All right. Be good.
You too.
Bye.